Test. Test. Yeah, maybe in it. Yeah, I will start if everybody entered. All right. Welcome everybody on our 21st Power Symposium, I think already, of the IEEE Student Branch Leuven Power and Energy Society chapter. So we're going to talk today about 5 constraints. I'm not doing it. People that are way more experienced than me will actually share their thoughts with you. So we are organizing this together with Edge. Professor Van Herten will do the introduction of Edge later. I will present very quickly the Student Branch Leuven PES chapter. So, who are we? Probably a lot of you recognize the faces we see here. We have a lot of active volunteers, people that are helping a lot out. And we're trying to do events like this. So, a bit of an overview. Our vision is a very broad statement that we want to create a community and we want people passionate about new challenges and opportunities. But maybe, as you will see later, these challenges aren't that new anymore. But you will see later. So what do? We do guest lectures. I will go very quickly. Symposia. As you can see, Professor Belmans has appeared here before, which was a very successful event together with Jera as well. We have also organized company visits. We will organize a company visit again, 12th of May, I think, to the battery energy storage plant in Vilvoorde. So keep the LinkedIn in your I don't know how to say it, forgot English. Then we also do some events for professional and personal growth, and that's it. So we're gonna do a Q&A via Microsoft Teams, so you can scan the QR code to post your questions, but we will also allow for in-person question. But if you're too shy, you can always ask via the Q&A of Teams. So that's it with respect to the student branch. I will now give the mic to Professor Van Herten.
Yeah, also welcome on my behalf. As a maybe nice thing to know, I think I organized the first Power Symposium 21 years ago, and the first few. So it's some years, and I think, Chris, you were one of the speakers then. From IMEC, still, I think, yeah, on micro machines, if I recall. Some years ago, huh? Feels like yesterday. So today I'll say just a few words on EDGE. What is EDGE? Is the Energy Transmission Competence Hub. And within it, we look at the future power system. Would like to investigate what it should look like. And why? Well, basically, the energy transition, it is underway. The energy transition, energy policy basically always deals with 3 topics. Needs to be sustainable, reliable, and cost-effective. And depending in which country you are, this definition can be slightly different, and the importance can be different as well, but these are the general drivers. What does sustainable mean? Towards 100% RES, or 80 and 20 something else. Maybe we still have some nuclear in 2050, who knows? Needs to be reliable. That means security of supply, but that also means energy independence, independent from formerly friendly nations, including Russia, Middle East, and US, I would say. And it needs to be cost effective. I don't know actually what that precisely means, but as cheap as possible to make sure that we have an economy. Now, in the stages of the energy transition, stage 0 is when we actually got to know that this happened, and this is in the 70s already, Club of Rome. Then stage 1 is when we were replacing conventional generators by renewable generators, and they might have been at different locations, inconvenient locations like offshore. But basically it was replacing generators by generators. So you need a bit more grid, but not crazy. What we're doing next is when it becomes really interesting. Now we're replacing fossil fuels in transport, heating, and industry where possible. And that means that we put new generators on top of what we're replacing. So now it becomes really interesting, because now the grid really needs to go much quicker. And we're still using the same generators at inconvenient places like the North Sea or Southern Europe, and still need to transport lots. So we need more grids, much more grids. If we look at what the system will look like in 2050, we'll go from a system that is currently 3/4 in primary energy consumption, fossil fuels, to something that is largely electrical. It will consume less, but it will be double the amount in electrical. If you look at where we need to go, I'll not go into detail, it's going to be vastly expensive. That means that you have the opportunity to earn good money. But that's probably not the most important, although maybe an interesting side note. Where we need to go, if you look at just at the North Sea and we assume 5 gigawatt links, we get spaghetti. And what we did in the past, we developed the grid because that's more cost effective, more reliable, and in the end leads to a better sustainable system. So we basically make a DC grid out of that, and then we need to import it on land as well. And for that, we need to invest for the next 15 years about 31 billion per year. 31 billion per year in transmission, just transmission. It's nice, it's good. Huh? In order to make sure that, and this is a word that Ronnie sometimes used, that we get our undue share, that we get more than what we purely on the mathematics-based deserve, because we are at the forefront. Flanders actually established the Energy Transmission Competence Hub, which is a part of Energyville. And our vision is that the future transmission system shall be multi-gigawatt, power electronics based, and underground. Why underground? I need to explain this to engineers all the time. There are people that don't like overhead transmission. Yeah, it's the case. It's true. That being said, so this is not going to be simple. We call it the Mars mission, which requires an acceleration to succeed, and this means more coordination, cooperation, and innovation. We do research, we work with industry, we have a partnership program with currently 15 members, still growing. We develop workforce through training, and we will have a fancy laboratory that we're very proud to open later this year. Okay, that's it for the edge, and then I have to do more talking before I can give the floor to Ronnie. I'm also happy to do the following, which is an announcement for everyone in the room. There are 2 announcements. There are 2 awards. There will be this year the 2nd Ronnie Belmont's PhD Award. And there will be the first Master Thesis Prize from Paul Steffens and Monique Flipts. We'll have some slides on both. We'll explain a little bit what this is. So this is already a nice introduction to our first speaker. This is a biennial award. The goal is to recognize the doctoral research in the field of energy supply in a broader sense. It needs to be a doctoral degree that has been obtained in the research area of Energyville, supervised by a researcher at Energyville. This should be 24 months prior to the date of submission, given that's a biannual one. So if you finish your PhD within 2 years of the 11th of September, then you can participate, talk with your supervisor, because he should write a beautiful letter saying that he thinks that this is a worthy thesis. And it's, I would say, substantial work. You'll get a €7,000 award and a certificate. Why are we doing this? And this is a nice introduction to our first speaker, because Ronnie, he was the founder of Energyville. He was also professor at the university. He's still an emeritus professor, past chairman of the board of the VREG, past chairman of the board of ELIA, still honorary chair of ELIA, a member of the scientific advisory board of EDF, NG, TENET, Gigastore, IEEE fellow, and much more. So I think for what we have been doing here in Leuven, he is really the one that sets the scene and makes sure that we actually have what we have today. And not only here in Leuven, also at the European level. You might recognize myself. I'm a member of this committee. Also Johan, who is present. And then Marlies van Baal, Chris de Velder, and Bram de Wisperaar. Based on the motivation, innovation, presentation, scientific contribution, layout, impact, and societal relevance, you'll get this award. And then I'm also happy to announce, and in this case it's Johan who is chairing this committee. There is an annual award. This is new. If you're doing your master thesis, again, it needs to be delivered, not doing. After delivering, you can apply. There is the Paul Steffens Monique Flips Fund. So as I understood, Paul Steffens worked here. They didn't have any kids, and for the left, at the end, the inheritance went partly to fund this fund. With the goal to recognize an outstanding master thesis in the field of sustainable electrical energy. It can be both for burgerlijk ingenieur and industrieel ingenieur, for civil and industrial engineers. The deadline is also the 11th of September. It's easy to remember. This is something with planes, but yeah. This award will be €1,000, and more details on that will be communicated later. But basically, the principle will be a motivation letter from the supervisor and the thesis in PDF, I guess. And probably very similar evaluation criteria will be used for that as well. Okay, that's me. I've done all the talking that is necessary, and maybe more. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, which I already did, is Ronnie Belmans, and he will guide us to the 5 guiding principles or 5 constraints for a net zero European energy system. Afterwards, he will be not challenged, but he will be supported by Tamas, who is a fresh graduate from this house and working from industry, and he will give his reflections on that. But Ronnie, you have the floor. You want to have the this one or this one? Iets hoger, iets hoger. Zo, ik doe het meestal over mijn ogen. Oké, alsjeblieft.
So, thank you, Dirk. Thank you, Robert, for introduction. Dirk thinks that he knows a lot of history. I know a lot of history too, and for those who want to pay me a beer or so, I can tell you a lot of history about Dirk. Some things that he might not remember himself, but that's no problem. So, let's go ahead.
Oh, that's your time is up.
Okay. I've been in this auditorium the first time, if I remember well, in '76 as a student. And it was a time between 2 petroleum crises. Petroleum crisis of '73 and the petroleum crisis of '79. So I've been in energy crises the whole of my life. It has been fun, and I still remember that at the end of our studies, in half our studies, we had to make a choice between different options, and I chose for power engineering, and my fellow students said, "Why the hell are you doing that? You're a good student, you should do electronics, there's a lot of fun in there, there's magnificent, everything is better than lousy power electronics that will not change in the whole of your career." Okay, I think some things have changed. And when Dirk asked me, we were discussing of what should we be doing, I said, let's go for the 5 constraints on a net zero European energy system. And this is about energy supply and how energy supply influences the choices that you can make for setting up your industry. So you cannot have a free choice. If you are at a certain point in the world, your energy supply is part of that. Who the hell? This is not fun. Okay, your energy supply influences the choices that you can make in industry that you can accommodate. Now, when I was preparing the whole lecture, I prepared it, I sent it over to Robert, he made it nicely into the Edge PowerPoint presentation. And yesterday evening, I thought myself, once upon a time, I have been giving presentations on energy supply. And I found and retrieved a presentation which I gave in 2006 up to 2008 with this slide. Okay? I can stop now if you like. Okay? This was the slide, the key slide of that presentation, which says energy is about security of supply, energy is about climate and sustainability, and is about competitiveness and affordability. And the solution in that triangle is key, period. And that's how we announced the strive towards Energyville. That's how we finalized the KU Leuven Energy Institute. And there is a guy that you may not recognize anymore because his photo now looks a bit different, but you may recognize him at the right-hand side. I did not change anything on this slide. Okay? So keep this in mind. You have to be careful that you have affordable energy. You have to be careful that your energy supply is compatible with nature and nature surroundings. And you have to be careful that it is secure. And secure means, and that's what I got as teaching, secure means that the lights should not go out now. But secure also means that it has to be supplied with what we call primary energy. And I was surprised to see when I took this back that there was on the right top-hand side a beginning of offshore wind. If I'm not wrong, it is Horns Reef in Denmark. The first offshore wind park ever built. But now let us return to the real presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, is there anything new? No, of course not. We have 3 lines of supply of fossil fuels, and still now these days, more than 70%, depending on the country, of the primary energy used is coming from fossil. There's nothing wrong about that. It has been that way everywhere. But does that mean that that fossil fuel is has been always the same? No. Let's start from the bottom. The first fossil fuel we used massively was coal. It was the basis of the European economy, but it's no longer accepted. The second was petroleum. There was some petroleum, there still is some petroleum found in Europe. Not much. Norway, there was a lot in the North Sea from the UK, but they all burned it. And now the supply is very uncertain. Robert can be clear. I think the first version of the slides came to you before the whole thing started in Iran. And then we came to natural gas. And natural gas was cheap and easy. A pipeline coming from the east, and we used it. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I don't have to convince you that that situation is no longer that stable as it was, say, 2 or 3 years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago already, if I look to Ukraine. So, the transition, and it was said the transition is on its way. Transition is on a way, not his way, on a way. And I don't know where it's going to end. But we don't have it in our own hands. And at this moment, if I look at fossil fuels, we see price volatility. We see geopolitical unrest. We see in Europe being far more expensive than the rest of the world. We see that producers of fossil fuels are using the fossil fuels to make products themselves. There's a lot of chemical industry in the Arabic countries, which wasn't there before. There is a climate impact, and there is the impact on environment and health. If you burn fuels, you get environmental and health impact. Nitrogen burned and that kind of stuff. So this is not good. And have a look here, and you see that as point 5, you see climate. So if people are saying, stop worrying with your renewable energy about the climate, renewable energy has something to do with climate, but it's not equivalent. The drive for renewable energy is not equivalent in solving or resolving the climate problem. It's far more important. And if we look at the new system, with renewables, we get back control. On the left-hand side, we don't have any control as Europe. In the new system, we can grow it locally. Renewables are found locally. We need to adapt the industry. And that's what this talk is about. We will not have the same industry if we are linking the industry to renewable energy, as we did with fossil fuels. And it's not going to be easy. There are hard constraints which we cannot change, it will be discussed. And time is not on our side. You're all too young to know the song of the Rolling Stones, Time is on my side, but that's not the case here. And it's about socio-economic, geopolitical, climate and environment. There's only one person here who has been with me on the green of Werchter, looking at the Rolling Stones, and that's Hakan. So we meet there sometimes. So if we go back here, you see that we have to get the transition done, and we have to do it now. But have a look at the left-hand corner. And the left-hand corner says, we have money. We spent, as Europe, as EU 27, we spent 400 billion of euro per year for buying fossil fuels. So every step we do to substitute fossil fuels by renewables frees up an awful lot of money. And the 400 million is based on reasonable prices, not what we see today. Okay? So whenever you have something where you can earn an awful lot of money with, and it helps the climate by accident, that's a good point. Can we do it? No. Can we do it simply? No. And here is the key, the 5 constraints. What, you all got courses on thermodynamics, most of you, certainly. And what does thermodynamics say? Thermodynamics are clear. Whenever you have electricity, this is the most efficient way to use energy. Come back to examples later. So electrify whatever you can electrify for applications. Okay? And when I gave lectures in 2005, one of the slides was, which I don't reuse, a car with a wire at the end that you could unwind and could not drive too far. Okay, things may change. Second point is, when you have electrified everything, produce the electricity with renewables, potentially nuclear. 3, set up an industry, and that's what EDGE is all about, set up an industry to produce all components, all systems, to make the electricity produced, transported, and delivered to where it is used in mechanical way, heat way, or anything like that. And those 3 points are efficiency first. So, and whenever you have done that, then look where you still need molecules. And then you have to look back and say, given the amount of renewables that we can generate in Europe, what kind of industry can we really have here that can deliver added value? Let's go for the first point first. And bear in mind very clearly, I don't start with transmission. I don't start with generation. I start with electrify everything you can. Now, Dirk has shown you the picture of Paul Stevens. Paul Stevens was a person who was dealing with electroheat and electrotechnical processing of materials. Okay? He was far ahead of his time. So, yes, you can do heating electrically. And if you look at energy efficiency first, and if you look at the different what we call energy vectors, that are flows of energy that go to an application, we look at the service. And the service is, for instance, driving 100 kilometers by car. The service may be heating up a house on 21, 22 degrees. And for a given amount of energy, kilowatt hours, megawatt hours, electricity always delivers far more services than any other energy vector. Okay? Keep that in mind. And there are 2 popular cases to do that, electric vehicles and electric heat. Now, if you look at the whole system, electrification means decarbonization by reducing consumption. Look at electric motor, and Johan Driesen is here. He probably won't shoot me that hard when those figures are here. If you look at Europe, in 2019, that was before COVID, we had a consumption of 3,365 terawatt hours of energy that is supplied to road transport. Okay? There are a lot of ships. 1 terawatt hour of electricity substitutes a ship of 300,000 tons of oil, to give you an example. Okay? Have a look at this. So if we could be able to replace all the internal combustion engines that consume those 3,365 terawatt hours of petroleum, we only need roughly 1/3 of the energy. So if the petroleum companies say, you as electricians will never be able to deliver 3,300 terawatt hours of electricity for driving cars, the answer is we won't. But we will drive as far as you do with the 3,300 by using 1,200 terawatt hours. And that we can do. It will take effort, but we can do. So if you look at the overall thing for low temperature industrial heat, for heat pumps, using a heat pump, again, requires only 1/3 of the industrial heat pump, 250 degree, 1/3 of the energy. So again, if you only want to go to 40 or 50 degrees, for instance, floor heating, you only use 1/5. So energy-wise, if you have electricity, you use the electricity, and it's going to be much, consuming much less. Electric cars are booming. Electric buses, trucks, no problem. Trans-European network with 1,000 electric charging points is set up. And if you look at the whole thing, we will see it flying over the next years. Are we going fast in Europe? The answer is no. We pretend to be fast, but it doesn't work quite well. In China, in 2022, 28% of the final energy use was supplied by electricity, and growing, it's now around 31-32%. The industry is the largest consumer in China, with 59% being electric of the demand. In Europe, and the US is lagging, we have 22% of the final energy being delivered by electricity. So, but as I told you, if there is 10% difference here, you have to multiply that difference by 3 to see the reduction in fossil fuels. So China is fully electrifying. China is consuming far less petroleum these days. And if you look at the industry, it consumes 36% of the electric energy, and it's really not enough. The electrification of the industry in Europe is not really up to speed. Look at these curves, 3 straight lines. You see the United States, you see Europe hovering around 20% of the final consumption in electricity, and you see China, which is up to from 10% in 2000 up to 30%. China is energy efficient while electrifying. Okay, next problem. We want to electrify. We are gaining an awful lot of energy with it. By the way, make a small calculation. If you have an internal combustion engine car, okay, and you would use the same petroleum for driving a generator with a 50% efficiency, you are using less petroleum. If you first produce from the petroleum electricity, using an electric car, then you use the petroleum directly in the electric car. Make the calculation for yourself, but that's fun, and you can't explain that to any politician. I'm going to be trying to be polite They are recording this whole thing. I'm going to try to keep a bit to stay polite to the politicians, but it's always very difficult. Okay. We want to electrify. First, we want to electrify, and we have already electricity demand. So we first have to decarbonize, get rid of fossil fuels, of what is already being electrified. And then we need to electrify whatever can be electrified efficiently. And that will grow the whole demand. If we look at nuclear, a lot of people are talking these days about new nuclear plants, etc. If I look at the predictions of nuclear and look at the age of nuclear power plant, we will need to work quite hard to get the generation capacity of nuclear power plants at the same level as we have now. Okay, we're going to retire a lot of them within the next 20 to 25 years. So that will be a very hard thing to do. So most of it, and certainly by 2035, because Europe demands that by 2035, the whole of the electricity system should be carbon-free. That's 10 years. Politicians are saying, oh, that's a long way. The average permitting process for a high voltage line is 6 years. Okay? So a long way, 10 years. And we need to build that. But there is a very difficult thing for politicians to understand. And bury that with me. Tell that to all your friends if you want to get no applause that evening if you are drinking the 5th beer. There is a big difference between renewables and between fossil fuels. I told you we are sending 400 billion euros per year out of Europe to buy fossil fuels. Okay? When you invest in renewables, you invest. And even if that costs 200 or 300 or 400 billion, this is here to stay. These are investments. And most of the politicians talk about, if I look at a PV setup, or if I look at an offshore wind farm, this costs that much. No, we invested so many billion euros in offshore wind. And this is a very big difference, which 99.9% of the politicians don't understand. I still have to find the point one. I don't know him or her. It must be there. It must be them, pretty sure. Okay? It's all about investments. It's all about long term. And we have to be very clear about that. Whenever we can transfer the whole thing from fossil fuel electricity to renewable electricity, we don't have to spend that annual amount of euros anymore flowing out of our economy. Okay, finish the first thing. Yeah, you see we are at this moment at 72%, but we have to get further, and we have to really decarbonize heat and cars, and we have to jump roughly by 2040 that 50% of the final energy supply will be electric. But far less fossil fuels will be used. Okay. Third, clean energy is capital intensive. There's an assessment that 140 billion euros per year for 10 years have to be spent. And Dirk was talking only about the grid. This is the whole stuff. Consumers also have to invest. But some investments are very easy. You have to replace your car every X years. X is up to you. So some of the investments are not anything new anymore. And with the prices that we see now these days on electric vehicles, there's no reason to go for the internal combustion engine. But if you want to renovate your house, a heat pump is still a lot of investment. And then we have to go for the networks. with batteries and storage. And in France, the transmission grid for 2040 should be around 100 billion euros to be invested in. So step by step, really going forward on that. That was a number that Dirk says, so we are quite close to each other. I don't know who copied who. Probably. Here you see the difference again with China. The red bullet is China. And the horizontal axis gives the electrification of demand. The vertical axis gives the investments in renewables. And you see that China, at the same moment, electrifies the consumption and installs renewables. Not enough to cope with the electrification rate. So they need to build a few coal-fired power plants that they use for 2,000, 3,000 hours per year to fill up the gap. They cannot follow up with the renewables building. But they electrify. And in Europe, we are massively building renewables. We have congestion, we have curtailment and the whole thing. We cannot get rid of the renewables at all time. Because we are lagging in electrification. Okay? You need both axes. That's what this figure says. And it's very important. And that's why I said in my first slide, electrification of demand is the first thing. Even if you have a gas-fired power plant, it's better to use a gas-fired power plant and a heat pump in industry to give you heat at 200, 250 degrees than burning the gas to heat up the potatoes to fry them. Okay? So, what do we need? We need minerals. Minerals are there. We need circular economy. Whenever the material is into Europe, don't let it get out anymore. Recycle it. And that's again something different from fossil fuels, because if you get fossil fuels in, you burn them and they are gone. With materials, you can recycle. And then you need manufacturing of components and systems. And then the question is, can we reshore industry, like some people are saying? Minerals. You see a number two. By the way, nuclear is also materials. Very interesting to see. If you look at the statistics of the European Union, you don't see nuclear energy as an input. The input is nuclear heat, because you have material that you transfer with our good friend Einstein into energy, and then they start counting. Okay? But look at the whole thing. You see, all those materials have to get in. And can we do something in Europe? Yeah. Portugal is #1 in the EU for lithium and #8 in the world. So yes, we can do things ourselves. On circular economy, a lot of it can be recycled, but it needs, of course, a lot of investments in logistics on that. And we have to look at mining and foreign partners. If you want more information on things, I can hear. Materials. There is a Critical Material Act from the EU with a number of materials. For those who got a course on chemistry, one time, the Mendeleev table, all those blocks that you never need to study, they are here. Okay? And here you see one thing, third line from the bottom, mining. We need to do mining in Europe ourselves. And you all know what NIMBY is? Not in my backyard. And here is NUMBY. Any idea? Not under my backyard. Okay? We don't want mining. And that's the real disease of Europe. We don't want. Okay? And that's, as long as that's a disease, we are in trouble. We need to refine those materials, and we need to recycle them. And then the third step is the systems to be part of the grid. Batteries, we lost to China. PV, same thing. Special things can be done, maybe new battery designs. But the rest, we are top in Europe. We have top companies with HVDC material. We have top companies with wind turbines and the whole stuff. Let's cherish them and let's go for that. Can we do reshoring? No. Not in the normal things. But if you look at the whole thing, we should separate mature PV and batteries from advanced and disruptive things. So forget that we could match China in lithium and the whole thing, but look at new things. Molecules. Did you hear about hydrogen? Forget about hydrogen. Okay? Why is that whole thing so popular? Because clean molecules that are made from electricity, and then with electrolysis of water produce hydrogen, putting CO2 with it, producing methane, methanol, or anything like that. It looks very easy because people know what it is about. They are used to using gas. They are used to using petrol. They are used to using kerosene. So it's always the same. And all the lobby of that fossil fuel addicts are saying to the politicians, but there's no problem. We will produce, with the surplus of renewable energy, we will produce hydrogen and everything remains the same. Okay? Some bus manufacturer in Belgium has learned the lesson too late. Okay, so it looks good, it looks fine. But policy is not what's going to help. We need to look at those clean molecules, and of course, there are applications. There are strong points. The readiness is there, operational. If you have an airplane, whether you supply it with kerosene or with e-kerosene, kerosene that is made out of hydrogen and CO2, the airplane doesn't know that. So it is quite easy. But will it work? No. A lot of electricity is needed, so you need to produce them where there is a lot of electricity, and the production chains are very inefficient. So don't do it if you can electrify. Can we import it? No. Maybe yes. Hydrogen cannot be transported by ship. If you put more energy in it, you get methanol or methane or anything like that, that you can transport. But again, the efficiency is further going down. They are policy appealing, but it won't work to import them in Europe. We will only have more expensive energy than the rest of the world, where there is more renewables. So you never can think that you can build an industry on imported e-molecules that is competitive. Bye-bye. What do we have? We could do some things with biofuels. We could do in niches where you can have those things. And we need to use carbon. Where do we get our carbon from? This is not here thing, bio. And we can have some renewable methane or biogenic carbon. That's fine. That's fine for chemical industry, for specialized products. And then the question is, do we have biomass enough in Europe? And the answer is yes, but we use biofuels and biomass for heating houses in Sweden, Finland, and the whole thing. Stop it. Heat those houses with heat pumps and use the biomass for biochemistry. Still a political choice that has to be made. It's not going to be easy. So we have to look at the whole thing. Then don't underestimate if we would recuperate all biomass that is now just burned in those countries, you have enough carbon atoms in biomass to do all chemistry that you need to do in Europe. But it's more expensive. It's different. It's new. You have to change. And then, and I'm almost there, can we have that energy-intensive industry? It's horrifying, and the answer is no. We need to change the industry fundamentally. And we cannot really compete worldwide in a global environment with basic products that have not an awful lot of added value. No way. This is going to be hard, but it's not for me to decide. And here you see two coal mines. The left is in Wallonia, in Belgium, where they kept the coal mines open as long as possible, spent all the money in keeping up the coal mining work. And on the right-hand side, you see Waterschei, Genk, where Energieville is. And the Flemish part of the country stopped the coal mining as fast as possible and left over money to do new things. So this is not fun. If you look at the whole thing, you see steel, aluminium, cement, etc., chemical industries like fertilizers. Probably not. I've done this work together with Jean-Michel Lachon, and Jean-Michel is coming from the north of France. We are now in the cycling season. Next Sunday, you have the Tour de Flanders, and the week after is Paris-Roubaix, okay, where all the old coal mines were in France. So we need to make that transition. And that transition is going to be painful. We can do an awful lot of things, still one investment cycle with CCS, carbon capture and storage. We can then try to use in steel some bio-based steel, and the rest we have to do electrically with secondary steel. Come back to that later. So we need to do that. We have to retrain people. In China, it's also a very difficult part of this the old post-coal system. But they have taken the route to electrification already. So the only thing we can do is try to do that as fast as possible. Give me now 5 minutes, I will give you an example. Steel. Steel is now produced from coal and iron ore. You put it in a blast furnace, you put oxygen with it, you put some scrap with it, recycled steel, and 20 to 25% can be scrap, the rest is basic iron ore. Total emissions around 9 gigaton per year worldwide. How is steel going to evolve? And you see it very nicely. The primary steel is going to be constant over the years. But more and more steel is going to come from recycled steel, which can be done electrically. So in Europe, we should turn our attention to the top part and not to the bottom part. If you look at scrap, you see how it can evolve. It's already available, and it will be growing. And an electric arc furnace, EAF, can use up to 100% scrap, but not for top steel, for a car body or something, for easy products. If you have top products, it can be up to 65%. What can you do? You can have natural gases input instead of coal, and then you can put CCS on it, carbon capture and storage, and combined, it gives you a reduction of 90% of CO2 emissions compared to the classical way of doing. We are here in the electrical engineering department. There is a very nice number under it. If you compare the electricity consumption of the left-hand approach with the electricity consumption of making steel now, it's a multiplication factor by 4 for the same amount of steel. Now, if you want to do it really the good stuff and doing the reduction of the iron ore by hydrogen, you see it on the right-hand side. You use 16 times the amount of electricity that we have now. No way of doing that in Europe where there is a reduced amount or not a big amount of renewables. So the local prices of electricity become important. Here you see the other things. If you look at the whole thing, and if you want to do CCS, carbon capture and storage, you need a CO2 grid, which will be locally. So, ladies and gentlemen, on the left-hand side, you need biomass. You see, it's going to be a very interesting future. General conclusions. Things will not be the same. And we need to make that transition as fast as possible, as fast as acceptable by society. Electricity is always the best way to go, but electrification is slow and demanding because it takes an awful lot of investment. Clean molecules, as I told you, they have their role, but limited, and the energy-intensive industry is very difficult. We presented this at a meeting where there were a lot of Italian politicians. And Jean-Michel and myself wanted to put some questions there. And I want to repeat this for any group of politicians that you like. Are you really willing to do electrification at the center? So are you supporting high voltage lines and etc.? Are you willing to enable the industry that does that? And are you willing for this group to put education and re-education at the center? And by answering those 3 questions, do you want to push the industry to go that way? And you can reverse all those questions and see what they are doing. They are trying to give subsidies to have the industry continue to do how and what they are doing now. And this is not good. And if you look at the whole questions, and if you look at what they call legacy assets, it's going to be very difficult. Society and that transition will take a lot of impact. And the whole recycling is not easy. So, and I want to finish that way. None of the society will remain, industrial society will remain the same. The question is how fast, and we should not spend any euro in trying to keep something alive that we know that in 5 years has no future. That's it.
Thank you, Ronnie. There will be opportunity for questions, but not now, because now we are giving the floor to the respondent. Are the slides the same because you brought your computer?
No, slides are different.
Okay, so we have them on the computer already. So for those that are here a little bit longer, they know Tamas. He didn't leave this house very long ago, about 2 years ago. But currently he is a senior service development engineer at Coreso, which is the regional security calculation office, coordination office in Brussels. So if you drive E40 into Brussels, straight on, you end up at Coreso, Ensui on the right, Coreso on the left. Takes you about an hour and a half. It's a 20 kilometer. Sorry, he leads the capacity calculation for Central Europe and develops the offshore HVDC coordination services for the North Sea. He holds a PhD from KU Leuven as research cross-border transmission and resource adequacy with Electa and Energyville. Before that, he worked as an application lead at Ensui and built digital solutions for power operators, and he also worked at GE Digital Energy. Throughout his career, he has worked with system operators across 30 countries, 30 plus on 5 continents. And outside of his work, he is an endurance athlete with a background in triathlon and marathon running. So yes, that also. But today, by the way, he is speaking as a fresh graduate from the university who was here before and is now working in industry and not as a representative of Coreso. Just wanted to make that clear. You have the floor.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. I think he's missing the key point here is that he was my PhD supervisor not so long ago. All right. I have a relatively short presentation. It's, I think, timed around 20 minutes. Just to build a little bit on the argument that Professor Bellman's made and think about the constraints behind all of these constraints, right? It's a very interesting presentation, and there is a paper attached to it, which I'm sure that will be circulated around. And I had a lot of interesting thoughts reading that paper. And I did go through several iterations in my head of what should I talk about, right? Because there's quite a lot of how you can branch off this topic. And what is quite clear is if you think of these hard energy constraints and the core framing of this paper is that these are physical constraints, right? There is not much debate about it. These are real constraints. These are the numbers. And then what you go through these 5 things is that you have to deliver on this, right? And where I would like to branch off is really the question, why is this so hard, right? If these constraints were clear, maybe some of them decades ago, the efficiency of converting hydrogen to electricity, right, round trip was 40%, and it's always not going to be improved by that much. And if we try to address this question, then we come across some interesting secondary topics, right? And I will walk through a couple of them. So the first one is a delivery gap, right? What is the actual problem? So just look at the numbers on the top of these slides, right? There's 27 member states in the EU, many TSOs, many national regulatories, and ultimately 450 million people. And all of these people need to be somehow coordinated to deliver very substantial efforts, right? Being the energy transition. And what the experience with this is that currently permitting and building grid takes more than 10 years. More than 50% of this is just actually getting the green light to get that. And the institutional architecture that you have to operate in is clearly not designed for a very fast transition, right? There is no central actor, there is not authority that is concentrated. So many times when you think of what is the actual problem is not knowing what to build, right? There are quite good ideas about what to build. It's more about how can we be able to build this together and build it, more importantly, at the pace necessary, right, to make this transition reality. It's also not that there is not deadlines, right? There are clearly very often regulatory deadlines attached to certain phases, and these are almost routinely exceeded, right? So we cannot deliver on them with the current ecosystem. And what's the fundamental problem, right? Why is this hard? And I would like to make the argument that this problem is primarily one of the big causes is a temporal problem. There is a misalignment between the different levels of actors and their incentive structures. So building infrastructure generally takes 10 to 15 years, right? And then you build it for several decades, so it's going to be there for 30, 40 years. It's a huge program with a massive investment first into it. And the grid of 2035, so what Professor Bermans was mentioning, right? So a fully decarbonized grid is technically, that means that's already planned, right? And that's already should be in the works and has been decided for. And when you zoom a little bit down there, there are laws and there are network codes which govern all of these, which can be rewritten and are routinely rewritten, but they're not rewritten fast enough, and they sit kind of in this awkward middle, which it's not fast enough to track the transition, but then they are too fast to actually base your investment on it, right? So you know that these are going to change by the time you would invest that money. And then there are political cycles, right, and electoral cycles, when oftentimes what you count on as subsidies are questions by the electorate, and routinely some of these are reversed, right? And some of these are then course corrections doing between the right and the left, right? And politicians change. And then there is on the lowest level, when there is also a lot of money has to be spent by the households, right? Who would really look at just the incentive of today. They would compare the price of a gas boiler with a heat pump. And when they come up with a conclusion, they also lock in themselves, for example, for a gas boiler to 20 to 30 years. And what you end up with is all of these actors on these layers who are rational, who are not trying to stop the energy transition, but they're locally problem solving, and their local optimum of what would be the rational decision for them then leads up to a misalignment, collectively suboptimal choice. So this is ultimately what I would argue for is a coordination problem across time, right? You have to somehow bridge this. You have to somehow have the institution and the knowledge to be able to operate in this environment. Reading back my slide, there are 4 clocks right now on the slide. There was a version where it was 3. And what are the core tensions, right? So we argue that, okay, it's first of all a coordination in time, but then, of course, there are couple of tensions which you have to navigate as a policymaker. And I think at the beginning, Professor Bermans was very clear about the energy trilemma, as we like to call it, right, between security and affordability and all of this. But when you plan out a transition, there are also a couple of other ones which I would like to mention. And I listed here 3: speed versus sovereignty, the transition versus stability, right? How quickly you would like to do all of this, and then how optimal versus how robust you would like to be to changes and changing in the environment. Now we walked through all of this, but I would like to explain is that none of this is obstruction, right? And I'm not mentioning this because this would be for the transition or against the transition, right? So even if you are, and you're very clear that you would like to deliver on this energy transition, these are trade-offs that you have to consider, and preferences on all of these are going to be changing. So let's start with a supply chain dilemma, right? I'm going to try to introduce a couple of concrete examples here. If you think of photovoltaic panels, right, one of the big achievement of the energy transition is that the cost of this is so cheap that some people put it up as fencing right nowadays. And this is a huge achievement which obviously helps us install hundreds of gigawatts of these, and it's often even more in the connection quiz, right? Everybody would like to build huge solar plants, but then all of these come from China, right? And there is a single source dependency, which I will get into, but you look at other materials, not just the PV example, you look at batteries, almost the same case is being replicated. You look at some of the materials that you would need, the refining processes, the factories, right, that would make pure enough lithium to then fabricate a battery, and all of these get very, very concentrated. And there is in the original paper, right, there is very clearly a distinction made that this is not the same as fossil fuel imports because you don't create long-term dependency. Once you import it, this is technology which is going to be on your rooftop, and you no longer need to import it a second time, right? So it's a little bit more robust to disruptions than fossil fuel. But then there is always the risk, right? And the risk is very clearly that there is a single actor dominating the upstream processing, and we really have a sour taste in our mouth, right, about unwinding from Russian gas, right? It took us, well, it's still taking us, right, quite a long time. And then substituting these critical minerals and the processing power is going to be extremely hard if you would ever have to do this, and it's very clear that if there is any disruption, for example, between Taiwan and China, so this, we will have to do this. So generally, the policy question is, of course, you cannot be autarky. You do benefit a lot from having these cheap, subsidized, clean tech imports, right? And somewhere the answer is in the middle. The second point, right, is communities. And I mentioned, and people often mention that it takes more than a decade to build a transmission grid. And a lot of times we stop at this, right? We just mentioned this as a blunt fact, and I think many people assume that this is waste, that we waste a lot of years in permitting, and this is purely nothing but just waiting for somebody's signature. I would make the argument that this is the reality, that it takes years for a community to understand what do you want to build, why is it necessary to build that, why is it going to be the optimal solution, right? Can I negotiate this transmission line to be put into the ground? Can I not? And ultimately to accept a compromise, right? And building this consent is slow. It's very, very expensive, right? Because often you have to take a much more expensive alternative. But ultimately, it's unavoidable. And why do I say it's unavoidable? It's because we tried, and I think many, many people failed at overriding this, right? So oftentimes, you would move fast, you would push through a policy, you would push through a major infrastructure project, and then you ultimately end up with a major, major backlash from communities. And there is an attempt on this, right? So we are, as an EU, framing many of this energy transition project as overarching public interest, and this would give a little bit of a faster track for approvals. But this, of course, assumes that this will work, right, in communities with a strong tradition for local governance, right, with local permitting rules, and ultimately a judiciary, right, which takes ages to come to a conclusion on any matter. So just the conclusion here is that consent takes time, right? You have to build this consent, and this has to be some of the things that you plan into when you're building for something which is going to take 30 years. So building durable support for a 30-year program does take time. And then there is the other core argument, which I think when it comes down to this energy planning and policy, people make, and that's looking at optimal pathways, right? We all have, as engineers, an instinct to optimize things and to really eliminate the redundancy, eliminate the waste. Let's look what is the lowest cost pathway which is going to take us, and any fragmentation or any divergence from this is going to look at us as this is something which we could eliminate. But then there is the real world, right? And the real world example, for example, is 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine, and we very, very quickly realized that what has been for decades the cheap fuel supplier for Europe is no longer going to be there. And the only options really, or the only redundancy built in this system were the things which a lot of energy planners considered that should have been eliminated a long time ago, right? That being French nuclear and Polish coal power plants. And let's be clear that this is an insurance against something which you not know, right? So for known unknowns, you can always plan it into your optimality gap, right? You can always plan it. But what I'm trying to make here is that the system optimized for known risks, right? It still remains very, very fragile for unknown risks. And this resilience counterpoint, right? The 27 states and this local governance and the whole misalignment, which we would consider it as redundancy. This is not based, this is ultimately, there is a strong option value, as economists would call it, right? But there is robustness built into the system because of this. I think I try to wrap up kind of core arguments here, right? Just iterating one after another. But then I was thinking, what should I leave this room with, right? What is kind of the closing argument here, knowing that I'm going to present to future engineers? And I think my core thesis here is, of course, coordination is very important. So there is a strong fragmentation in Europe, and there is not going to be a single actor which is going to be capable of overruling any of this. So the only way to make progress is to build bridges and to coordinate. But Europe is also a very strong continent, both technologically and capital-wise. It's going to be able to raise the necessary capital. It's going to be able to have the technology, but it will need institutions and it will need people who can collectively execute on those decisions. And the core competence for you as future engineers, right, and future experts of this field, I would make the argument, is actually navigating these institutional gaps, right? Is trying to build coordinations where no single actor would hold full authority. It's not one person that you have to convince, it's a group of people, and making progress in an era and in legislative frameworks, right, which are clearly not designed to be fast and it's not designed to be a quick transition. And of course, this work that is ahead is still very much to be done, right? It's work ahead for all of you. I'm going to close it here, and thanks a lot for the opportunity.
The rest as well? No, that part, yes. You stay here.
Are the slides for you? Slides?
No. We just have a debate. No slides for the debate, but we have chairs. So we were thinking about these comfy armchairs, etc. But this is this is the modern view. Have a seat. Question time. There were some questions that were asked in advance. There was also a QR code on the screen at some point in time. I have no idea how the questions from the Q&A get to me, so I'll just ask a question myself to get the discussion up and running. So some of the questions that have been shared and the discussion has been on this as well is, it seems that we are not in an easy situation. Politicians seem to be not 100% well informed, and then we have 27 countries with 27 different types of politicians with different opinions. So, I know it's unpopular, but in Europe we still think that democracy has some value. I mean, this is against the trend in the rest of the world. But how should we move forward? I mean, is this EU 27 with independent energy systems the best way forward to get this thing at a European level developed? Can we do it with 27? Or should we have a enlightened despot to move us forward?
I was quite happy with what you said about it. We need, and we are getting discussed that in Florence, we need a different system. It could take time. First of all, democracy has one good thing. When you change something, it may take long, but it does take the same time to return it. Okay, so you had a democracy in the United States, using the past time, and you see how fast it can return good decisions if you have no longer a democracy. So democracy, as Churchill said, democracy is a very bad system, but we don't have anything better. That said, for the TSO business, we clearly are in a very difficult situation. And I made a comparison, and I discussed it already with an awful lot of people. I want to throw it also in the room here. What we are in a situation where we have 47 perfect professional musicians who know their instruments better than anyone else, and they are called TSOs. Okay? We give them the grid code, so we give them the partiture with the music notes, and we say, play the whole thing with respect to the whole thing. And then we bring them together, and we hope that they play a good symphony. This does not work. We meet a person who writes the music, okay? That's the overall system planner. And we need an overall conductor of the orchestra, which is the ISO. Let's be clear, this is not going to happen in my lifetime. And I hope to still have a few years to go. But we should go as fast as possible to a regional system planner and a regional system operator. And Coreso and its friends are not regional system operators, but it wouldn't take them that much big step to become that. And then from the data that they collected, we need a regional system planner. And otherwise it will never, never work. And I know another person who has done a PhD in this group is Edwin Hazen. Edwin will tell you that they are all close to doing that. No.
So Edwin is the head planner at NSOE, for those that don't know. He's the head of the planning office at NSOE today. So, and the question that I asked is also because you might not know, but it's not just us as system as engineers in the electrical business that discuss it. Energy is something that is regulated in the European laws. I mean, in the original laws, that this is something that you decide on a country level. This is not something that you decide amongst others. Everyone has the autonomy to decide about energy themselves. Each country does that one by one. So if you would like to do that at a European level, let's say make a master plan for Europe, you need to change the European constitution.
Europe has been founded on energy because it was the EGKS, the European Community for Coal and Steel, that started the whole thing, and in parallel with it, Euratom. So the two basic things from Europe were energy, and then they forgot it. Okay, I was looking at your slides and I saw that you was pointing to the different attitudes towards energy, coal, Germany getting out of everything, and hoping that Angela hoped that the angel came from Russia, but it didn't work out that well. Coal in Poland, nuclear in France, but again, nuclear in France can only work if the rest of Europe is there. Okay, and one of the nice things, and I would like to have a comment of you, what would have happened with France in 2022, 2023, when Coreso and the whole thing would not have been there?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot to unpack, but I will just try to be brief. So I think the original question was democracy, right? And where there is...
No, whether we can, in our system of 27 countries, act within a time frame that is required. I mean, we have only 25 years left, right?
Yeah, and I think there is, of course, a lot to unpack here, and there are alternatives to consider. But for me, the big point for democracy is the buy-in, right? You might have a politician who decides very horrible things that you don't agree with, but then he has the votes, right? People actually elected him, and that gives him the legitimacy to decide on those matters. And as a technocrat or as anybody who's an expert of the field, right, you don't actually have the legitimacy, right? Nobody voted for you, nobody elected for you, and that's makes it much more easier to tolerate hard decisions, right? So you can always make the argument that closing down, for example, a coal mine is much easier if a majority voted for it, right, instead of an expert who suggested this. Of course, there is a lot of gray zones in this. And then on Europe, it's very clear, as you mentioned it in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, so the European Constitution, that the supply of electricity is national competence. Grids, environment, things, which relate to it, state aid, for example, how much the state can pay for these producers are all European competencies. So there is actually quite a big rule to harmonize this and to work better. But indeed, it's a quite messy thing to untangle and to have like unified energy planning.
Okay, very good, very good. In the meantime, I'll because we have to finish in about 10 minutes, and I have some more questions, but I would like to give the audience also the opportunity to ask questions. That came as a surprise. Just in case, I'll ask another question, so you can think about it, and then you can ask your question after that. I mean, there's some questions that were sent in advance. I think there was a registration fee. This is registration form, and they're a bit linked, and they follow on the previous one. Does recent geopolitical volatility in oil and gas markets change? Which constraint is most critical for building a resilient net zero European energy system? And then someone asked also, what's your opinion on Trump's buyout for the wind projects of Total Energies? So I would say is that Iran, a blessing or a curse for the energy system in Europe, as a summary.
Yeah, exactly. So there are 2 points to this, right? I think one of the first points that you have that people often forget is that, well, there are multiple things here that I think I want to mention. One of them is that most commodities, as oil, is priced on the margin, right? So it's always how expensive is your last barrel that you have to buy. We set the price for everybody else, which means that it's very, very sensitive to supply shocks, right? You might have a lot of oil locked into long-term contracts, but then if all that ties to the margin, then it's very sensitive. The second point is that it's still a supply-demand balance, right? The prices are so high because there is demand for it. That's the reality. And it reaches a category which we call demand destruction, right? When you really quickly start to build alternative capacity, right? You start to fuel switch, where you don't drive your car that much, where you decrease the demand to that degree that the prices are going to be compensated. And as long as these market fundamentals work right, any disruption in oil supply will mean that there is, of course, a stronger incentive to decarbonize, to switch. But Iran is a relatively short conflict so far, right? We are talking a couple of weeks. You're not necessarily going to make a major investment on that, right? You would wait it out and you would see what happens there.
Okay. Honey? So the question was on the geopolitical volatility, and maybe then also on the buyout for wind, if you have any opinion on that.
Geopolitical, the big danger is that the politicians will throw money at the whole thing, so people don't feel the price spikes, and that's for me the biggest danger of the whole thing. Let the beast go, and the beast will go in the right direction. Now, the beast in the US, I looked at the total thing a bit more in detail. It's just fun. It's just fun. The French are so good. You should really give them applause. What Trump did is he paid them out. He gave them the money back of the offshore thing, all the money, on the demand that they invested in fossil fuel development in the US. Will Total do that? probably it will take them 10 years to get a permit, and they will keep the money and nothing will have happened. So that's so stupid what is happening there. And if you then look at Europe pretending that they are going to electrify, China electrifying like hell, India electrifying like hell, I'm looking forward to see what is going to happen with all the petroleum. This is going to be very interesting to see. If you look at the car developments in China, the demand for oil will go down very rapidly. The demand for oil is going to be down in Europe very rapidly. So I loved that Frau Dr. von der Leyen promised to Trump to buy 700 billion of natural gas every year. We only are consuming 400 billion of fossil fuels. So something in those numbers don't match. And I think if we want to analyze the policy of Trump, like with Total, before we start the analysis, he has forgotten what he has said. So that's the biggest problem with the whole thing in there. I may be wrong, but that's probably that's the real trouble. Okay, and how can you react to something which changes his mind faster than you can even think of how to react to the previous thing?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is that we need to think for ourselves instead of
Yeah,
follow the great leader.
And that's why I'm saying electrify, what the Chinese do, electrify, and that's a no regret option.
Any questions from the audience? I need to start. Yes. Oh, we have two, but okay. Well, maybe you can both ask your question and then we can answer them together.
Ronnie, I think the picture you painted reminded me a bit, in the situation we had in the 50s, more or less, right? Because there was not really a big energy system, and then the industry was dead. And if we don't do anything, I think we are going to end up going into that direction. But then we sort of had the mindset of investing into really infrastructure. And what changed in our mindset that we cannot do that anymore, and how do we get back to that mindset?
Yeah, Louis.
It's a bit different from Hakan's question, but you both perfectly pointed out that in Europe we would need to work together and collaborate on a European level. However, if you look at the political landscapes in the last couple of years, it looks like all of the European countries themselves have trouble working together within itself with a political landscape that diverges in terms of political directions, let's say. And even within a country, it gets more and more difficult to work together. So what's your future outlook for even making that then possible on a European level?
Okay, two diverse questions. You want first? Yes, you're appointed as the first respondent. You can choose which question, and Ronnie has to take the other one.
Yeah, I will try to be brief for both of them. So, is it the 1950s, and why are we not better at building infrastructure? I think there are 2 points here, right? One of them is that building infrastructure takes capacity to build infrastructure, right? So the lead times here are huge. So if you would like to build the simplest thing, right? A nuclear power plant, then you first need to have the factories to produce the parts for a nuclear power plant, and all of this is taking forever, right? So I think we are, for example, in the HVDC business, you would think why people are not investing into capacity to build this. There's clearly a pretty high profit margin on these devices, where the reality is that everybody has suppliers, and then you have to convince your suppliers to invest into there. And there are restrictions to this, so generally these industrial transitions are very linear to shocks, right? So it takes a slow and steady demand to build up the capacity, right? To build new things. And I think in Europe we are getting there, but it takes obviously much longer to slowly ramp up the capacity to produce big things and to produce them potentially in the continent, right? Somewhere with local suppliers. And then your question was, yes, of course, how can we work together? I think clearly my thesis today was coordination, right? That you have to build the mechanisms that you're robust against a little bit the politics, and you can make choices. But I think personally, and this is just my personal opinion, that politics always looks, when you look at the short term, this is such a massive thing, right? People are competing here, they are all saying that they cannot agree on, and that's their job, right? So as a politician, if you're in opposition, that's your job to challenge the governing coalition, and it's not their job to work together. But when you look at the long-term results, you still can reach agreements, and in Europe, typically this is triggered through crisis situations, right? We always say that in crisis, Europe is kind of where it moves forward, the European project. So I wouldn't be so pessimistic, I think, as your question suggested, that we could not bridge these gaps.
Ronnie, maybe you can respond also to Hakan's question. There was a Marshall Plan after the World War. Now we have the grid package, which also is calls for a master plan for the grid, and the European Commission will develop the grid. Do you have an opinion about, is that a replacement for the Marshall Plan, and will this deliver the solution that we're all eager to see?
I think there should be a grids package, but the grids package which has been written now is not a package to support the grid, but that's the title. As I said, we need a conductor and the whole thing, so that should be in there. Why can't we do it anymore? It's very easy. Okay, it's easy because I was born in the 50s. I don't know too much about it, but at that moment, there was a transition, and that transition gave to the population an awful lot of comfort, okay? And when I was born, in the house where I was living, that house was heated by coal. Okay, there was no shower, there was nothing. And steadily in the 60s, the investments that were done gave the feeling that the level of comfort went up and up. What I see, what I feel, and I'm not a philosopher, I'm neither a social scientist person, but what I see is that people have the impression that there is nothing new that is offered to them. And that's a big problem, that it's all in nuisance, and that's the way that politicians, and this really is, and you can look at my LinkedIn today, I've written it quite hard. That's today the big non-working of politicians. They don't do their job. They have to do the job, and as you said, people have to be convinced of a high voltage line, etc. But the first thing a politician does, if you put a line between A and B, is looking at the protesters and fire and get them on the steam to protest, rather than informing people that it is for a next step. And I think, and I discussed that also with Leuven Health and Dirk Salens, and also for ourselves. We have to convince people that what we are doing with the energy transition will deliver them a better standard of living. And the first thing that people are saying, if you talk about electric car 10 years ago, but oh, how horrible, you have to stop every 200 kilometers to fill it up, and it has to be there for 6 hours, etc., etc. Always the negative information. We have to be clear that the transition is going to be to a better societal environment. About Europe, I've lived in a time where Europe were 6 countries. Okay, the Benelux, France, Italy, and part of Germany. Europe is now 27. This has major disadvantages. The decision methodology has not changed. This cannot be kept. And as long as that is kept the same way with unanimity, etc., you will have trouble. What we have to be very fast on, and that's the only way, and this is nothing to do with power engineering, we have to get a reliable information system. Because all of the fragmentation that you talk about is really pushed forward by social media. And this is not good. And this is a big problem where they ask me, persons like me, what is your opinion on that? I have an opinion on the Belgium soccer team. I have an opinion on who is going to win the Tour de Flanders next weekend, but I have no opinion on energy. I have knowledge, or I pretend to have knowledge. And I don't want to go into a debate with somebody who has an opinion on energy. That has to change. Some people have knowledge, and it should be acknowledged. And as long as politicians don't support that acknowledgement of knowledge, we have a fully serious societal problem. I don't want to get into a debate. I was asked in a debate with people that you might have, some people that know, or Boudry kind of people. I never go into debate with a politician or with a philosopher on energy. And the rest I don't want to go in debate. I can give information, I can give knowledge, and Dirk knows that, Johan knows that too. The top line of Energyville is we provide science-based policy input. No advice. That's the only thing you can do. You have knowledge as an engineer student, and that knowledge you give as input. Political decisions have to be made afterwards. You give choices. Don't give an advice on which choice to take. Give input, that's all you do.
And on this bombshell, let's finish the session with an applause for our excellent speakers and the great debate that we had. Thank you. I think we have something more to come in the form of some carbons connected. Oh, in feedback. Oh, okay. Yes.
One more slide. The feedback, if you could give it, then we can organize more events. That would be really nice. And if you are enjoying this event, we are still not done yet. We have a networking reception. You can follow us on LinkedIn. Thank you.
With some hydrocarbons that will be there.
Of course.
Yes, of course. Yeah, that's it. Follow the leader. Who is that? Is that Giacomo?
Supreme leader.
And you probably want to.
You are one of the many. Kijk ons daar, mooi buzzword.
Okay, these are your chargers. Where is it? Upstairs?
I think they fit it well together. Like you're fully right. I mean, we complain a lot, but it is also something that you need to acknowledge. These things just take time because we're in a democracy, and it's I mean, it's not because you believe that this is the right way that everyone just needs to accept and roll over, because that's exactly what we don't want. But still, the processes could be